Welcome to the Autism Housing Network and the Madison House Autism Foundation. My name is Desiree Kamika, and I'm the Director of Community Education, Outreach, and Advocacy. Now that you've taken a look at the traditional options that are available for housing and support services, let's see what's happening across the country. How are people using the traditional funding sources to be able to provide a newer model of housing and supports? A lot of the traditional models were created during a different culture of how we interacted with people with disabilities and autism. Now, things are evolving. We've gone through the institutional care model where people were looked at as a patient and the doctors were the expert. And we've moved into this area of providers and consumers of services. And really, our goal is to even move further past that to say there are self-directed individuals with disabilities and facilitators to allow them to get the supports and live the way in which they want to live. And of course, our goal is to be able to have natural supports, where we don't always have to have paid people coming and supporting us, but maybe friends, neighbors, who are able to step in when we can't pay somebody to be able to take us to a grocery store, or go to the movies, or take us to a ball game, sharing a meal with. Those are natural supports, unpaid natural supports, which I think a lot of us just call friends. One of the opportunities that has begun to grow are private pay transitional options. So especially for those on the autism spectrum, many are not eligible for waiver services, whether it be because eligibility is based on IQ, or maybe they can't demonstrate that they need more support with functional activities of daily living. There's a lot of people on the spectrum who have graduated from high school and aren't necessarily ready to live on their own in the community or go to college and live in a typical dorm room. They need a little bit of outside of the family home time with a little bit more structure and support so that they could gain the life skills needed to live more independently. We call these transitional or post-secondary opportunities. These are typically private pay. They would not typically be covered by a waiver unless it was a self-directed waiver or a self-determination waiver, which is now becoming more and more available in different states. This is not a permanent housing option. These type of programs are really on a limited basis. Some programs even have a 3 to 5 year limit of how somebody can be part of the program. Many of them have existing relationships with local community colleges or universities. Maybe they have vocational opportunities, volunteer opportunities, internship relationships, so that they can act as a liaison with the greater community to create more opportunities for somebody on the spectrum. Oftentimes, this is a younger crowd. You don't see too many 50-year-olds going through these type of transitional programs. It just wasn't around then. Really, it has been the private market realizing that there is this gap of supports between those on the spectrum who can't access waiver services yet want to live on their own and need that non-family structure and background support to get them to where they need to be to live by themselves. It's important to also consider a lot of these programs are actually not in your own community. Many people travel from state to be able to go to these post-secondary or transitional options. And so it's okay if somebody decides that this is their new community, but to really understand that if you want to access waiver services in the future, if that does become available, that waiver supports cannot cross state lines. So if somebody does become eligible for a waiver in one state as they're going through this transition program and can get supported living services, for example, or personal assistant waiver to be able to help them with drop-in supports, they may not very easily be able to cross back over another state line. So I'm going to show you a couple of pictures about a program out in California called Moving Forward Towards Independence. And this was started about a decade ago. It's located right in the heart of Napa, California, in the middle of a neighborhood. I was speaking to one of the staff, and the way that she described it was, no frills, just a house on the street. And it really is that. You would never know that this was a transitional program driving through the Napa neighborhood. The property actually has 3 different homes on it. It has a home that is used as the women's house, and then a home that is used as the men's house, and then in the back there's actually a mini apartment building. And they also have a trailer there that acts as kind of the office during the day. When individuals start the program, they move either into the women's home or into the men's home, and then once they get enough life skills in those homes, then they move into the apartment to kind of test out their skills in really living alone before they take the big leap out into finding a home in the community. Every participant has their own goals and schedules. So that means that somebody might decide to go to a community college. And so they have their community college classes, but they also have access to additional classes. So there might be a class that is on dinner prep, or there might be a class that is on learning a guitar, music class, or it might be band practice. Specifically, at moving forward, they have decided in the men's home that they're not going to have a living room, they're going to have the band room, and they have a band that they practice with. So they're going to have band practice certain times of the week. They also have a calendar which has different greater community activities. This way, if you're living there with others, you can decide, oh, I think I want to go to this festival next weekend. Would you like to come with me? So they try to show people how you can look at different websites within your community to be able to access different community events. Everyone is responsible for chores. No one gets off without having chores. That's another part of living in a transitional community is typically you won't have a housekeeper who comes in or somebody else who will be preparing meals, but that you really are learning all the skills necessary, which includes cleaning, to live on your own. Moving Forward also has a computer or community room so that even though some people might view gaming as something that's a very individualized activity in front of one's computer, a lot of people like to get together here and they'll be gaming and they'll all be on the row of computers gaming together. So it really is quite a social activity. It's also where if you're bored and you want to hang out with someone, you can go to the community room and sooner or later someone else is going to walk in as well. The next housing option I'd like to talk to you about is single-family home options. Now in this situation, somebody is either moving to a home that was donated or bought. A house can be bought by a group of families, so everyone owns maybe a percentage of the home. It can be bought by one family and then others pay rent to live there as well. Accessory dwellings or casitas can be added to an existing house. This way an individual with a disability could live in the casita, and it might even be their family living in the single family home. And then once their family moves on, that individual can choose to stay in their casita or to move into the home with roommates and rent out the casita, or they can rent out their family home and then have that income coming in as well. So being able to develop an accessory dwelling, sometimes these are called tiny homes or granny pods, but it gives another layer of privacy yet natural support in a typical neighborhood. In a single-family home option, whether you decide to purchase the home yourself or partner with others, keeping it unlicensed will allow it to stay consumer-controlled housing. This way, you can choose what service provider, or the individuals who live there can choose different service providers to be able to access those type of supports from a waiver. Otherwise, you can also partner with a service providing agency that you trust and that you think will be around for a long time, and they can actually rent the home from you as well, and then you can have a provider-owned and controlled setting. You may not want to donate the home to a service provider because then you will lose control of that asset for the future, and it could provide in the future the possibility of that nonprofit or service provider selling the home and your loved one having to move. So keeping control of the ownership of the home is a fairly important detail that many have realized. It's important to understand that one's home will not affect their assets. So if somebody is on SSI, you can live in $1 million home and that's okay. It's not going to affect your SSI. But if an individual is directly getting rent from their roommates, or let's say the house that they're renting, that could affect SSI. So it's very important that you speak to your special needs financial planner to set up the correct trusts to make sure that money is not going to kick somebody off of their SSI or other public supports. ABLE Acts could be something very helpful in the future as well. So keep a lookout because ABLE Acts will soon be coming to your state as well. Some barriers that you might face when establishing a single-family home option: there could be zoning requirements that would not allow an accessory dwelling to be used. Something to note, tiny homes, or if it is built on a movable structure, don't necessarily need to meet those type of zoning restrictions, and it provides that individual the option of moving their tiny home elsewhere. Property management, fiscal oversight, decision-making authority needs to be carefully considered and legally documented. This is a great option for those who want to control who are going to be their roommates. Additionally, if you own your own home, then you don't risk having to move, which is really a fantastic security for a person with a disability, especially in such a fluctuating housing market. Also, you are free to be able to invest in any adaptations. Sometimes if you're renting an apartment or a home somewhere, you can't necessarily make the structural changes that you would like. Maybe you want to round off the corners, or maybe you want to open up a window, or you want to create a nook somewhere so you have spaces to be able to go and read a book or relax. When you own your own home, you can make those physical adaptations, and it's an investment that goes into your asset and not necessarily lost if you move. So I'm going to give you an example of Sunridge Ranch and the Trellis Center in Ellensburg, Washington. The founding family bought the entire property and sold 25% shares to 3 other roommates. So 4 individuals with disabilities live in their own home. They then used their personal assistance waivers and combined them to be able to hire a host family. So this is a model of shared living. So they were able to use their waiver monies and combine them to be able to hire this host family that also lives in the home with the 4 young men. The home has security cameras that are all in the common spaces, so anyone that the individuals with disabilities approve to be able to have access to those cameras to provide that higher accountability can see directly on their smartphone exactly what's happening in that house at all times. This type of technology is being used more and more, and it's very important that it is clear to those that are involved to discuss privacy issues in regards to the security cameras. But it is a fantastic way to be able to have a little bit more accountability. And I give you an example. There was a laptop that was sitting on one of the counters, and water had spilled on the laptop. Who spilled the water on the laptop? They just had to go back into the security camera footage, and they were able to see that it was actually one of the residents. And it was one of the residents who typically needs a lot of behavioral supports in terms of prompting, but he was able to identify that he just spilled water on that laptop, and it was necessary for him to go and get paper towels, clean up the mess that he made, reposition the laptop. He even closed the laptop and then made sure he disposed of all the paper towels correctly in the trash can so that he wouldn't get caught. So it's kind of funny. They found out that the house parents were not the ones that spilled water on that laptop, that it actually was one of the residents, and it showed them that one of the residents has much more capabilities than sometimes he lets on in terms of cleaning. So the host family takes care of the overnight type of staffing and making sure that those who live there are having breakfast and help them prepare their meal. During the day's support is actually a private pay program. So the families pay for their sons to be able to work in an agricultural setting. They created a greenhouse that was specifically for those on the spectrum, designed to be able to have spaces for visual cues and having the platforms to be able to have people working side by side or across the table from somebody to offer that additional support. They also created a really neat chicken coop that, unlike other chicken coops, really decreases the dust and the grime that's needed to be able to collect the eggs and be able to clean out the chicken coop. They also have a really good relationship with the university in that area, and so a PhD student has come to live at Sunridge. He lives in another home that is really close to where the guys live, and he, as part of his dissertation, has actually created an online metric system for tracking the progress of an individual's support plan to see how the progress that they're making to meet their individualized goals. And so that partnership is really unique, working with a student who needs to write a dissertation, but also giving them the opportunity to directly impact the lives of these 4 men has been such a win-win opportunity. The next level that they're going into, not just to be a day program, but they have now started their own business. So not only will these 4 men own their own home, they will also soon own their own business. They had conversations with a local business that needed a peppers, produce, and wanted to be able to locally source them. So now they will be creating these peppers, and the business will have these locally sourced peppers that were grown and raised by a business that employs individuals and is owned by those with disabilities. So it really is a fantastic opportunity for entrepreneurial business to be supported by their local community, and there's such a symbiotic relationship with the men who live at Sunridge and their local community. Now, this one single family home is being replicated in different parts of their area because it has been such a fantastic model. So one of the other homes that has been built in another area of the county, they decided that because the one home already has a pool, that they're not going to create a pool, that instead they're going to do an indoor sports court. And so for those families to have intentional relationships and connections, they were able to develop kind of more common spaces for the collective intentional community that might be located in other houses. The next model I'd like to talk about using a single family home is group adult foster care. Now, this group adult foster care funding stream was created really for those who were aging or who were elderly. It was to allow individuals who maybe have lost their spouse to be able to live together in an intentional community. Well, this group in Massachusetts has decided that they were going to rehab a home. It's a beautiful home, and they've made 2 kitchens, 10 bedrooms, and 3 common spaces with separate entrances in different parts of the home. And so 12 individuals on the spectrum live there. And there's a separate apartment for the host family. Again, this is the opportunity where they're using adult foster care funding, but that host family is not the family who's in control of the housing. The individuals with disabilities live in that home and pay rent, and if the relationship with the host family changes, it's the host family who will be forced to move, not the individuals. This home is right next to the main transportation line in Boston, right next to the subway. They are walking distance from coffee shops, from a Walgreens, from grocery stores. The men who live there can very easily access their community by foot, and then they can also access public transportation to get into the city. Every person who lives there makes their own schedule, and they keep everyone updated via a small communication system. So if, we know Johnny hasn't come home and it's 10 o'clock, but he said he'd be home by 9, maybe someone can just text him to make sure that everything is okay on his way home. And one of the really unique things that I thought could have been a challenge with having 11 roommates actually turned out in my interviews with one of the residents that it was one of the assets of living there, that there was always somebody to hang out with. And he said that he made friends with people who he never thought he would make friends with, but that it actually turned out to be a really great relationship. This specific young man previously was living in a group home. He was living in a group home with other men with disabilities who were in their 60s, developmental disabilities, and he really didn't have a relationship with them. He also didn't need as much supports as the state was paying in this group home. So not only by living in this adult foster care arrangement has he been giving so much more independence, he can now live with his peers, but he's also probably saving the state about $60,000 a year by moving into this setting instead of being in a more restrictive setting for him, which would have been the group home with several aging men.